If there is a cold case in this city's history that has consumed more resources, more hours, more effort, no one can name it. From Ohio Mysteries, the Akron Beacon Journal, and Ohio.com, this is Elusive Justice, the story of Ricky Beard and Mary Leonard. I'm Stephanie Warsmith, a reporter at the Akron Beacon Journal for more than 20 years, including a decade covering crime in courts. Now, Elusive Justice Part 3, Theories. We're talking to Lieutenant Dave Whidden. He's in charge of homicide investigators at the Akron Police Department.
I just hate crime, dealing with crime victims all these years. I hate what it does to people and how vulnerable it makes you feel, and especially in this city.
And Whidden hates that after 40 years, his department still can offer no justice to the families of Mary Leonard and Ricky Beard. On a Friday night in August of 1979, the teen sweethearts left their home in Akron's North Hill neighborhood and went on a date to a drive-in theater. They left early, telling friends at the drive-in they needed to make Mary's midnight curfew. Their friends never saw them again. Their disappearance grew into 6 years of misery and conjecture for their loved ones, until a backhoe operator digging a ditch through Akron's Merriman Valley discovered their bones in 1985. In this episode, we explore the investigative teams that tried to solve this mystery over the past 4 decades and the 3 theories that have risen to the top: the motorcycle gang, the angry homeowner, and the serial killer. Theory number 1, the motorcycle gang. It was one of the earliest theories favored by those who investigated the case in the 1980s, though Akron police rarely spoke about this or any theory in the past. The first time they publicly suggested a motorcycle gang had entered the narrative was in a newspaper article on the 10th anniversary in 1989. Summit County Coroner William Cox noted how Ricky had been shot at least twice and Mary had been shot 3 times, as well as stabbed and beaten. When you see that kind of overkill, you think of a motorcycle gang killing, he said. They will shoot you multiple times and stab you multiple times. Akron Detective John Bailey was also very general in explaining the theory. He said there were suspicions Ricky was involved in minor drug activity on the basis of the marijuana cigarette butts found in his car's ashtray. But he noted that Mary Leonard had nothing like that in her background, so it was hard to imagine why a gang would involve her. In 1999, on the 20th anniversary of the case, Detective Edward Moriarty announced the department had learned things in the case, things people were too afraid to say 20 years earlier. But now they were willing to talk. Moriarty reopened the case with Akron police officers Janet and Ed Matthews, a brother and sister who had grown up in North Hill about 10 years behind Ricky and Mary. They are the children of the elder Ed Matthews, a veteran of the force and one of the case's early investigators. The Matthews offered a unique perspective. They had an intimate knowledge of the neighborhood, and they knew many people who were also friends of the Beards and Leonards. Because in 2006, Matthews participated in a television series called Sensing Murder, which featured the case in its first season. And during the show, Matthews revealed her favorite scenario, which again featured a motorcycle gang. She told producers she believes Mary and Ricky made it home before curfew that Friday night in 1979. A neighbor said that while he didn't see them, He heard them giggling and talking on the steps in front of the Leonard home before midnight, and he saw Ricky's car parked in the street. Matthews believed it was there that someone came to get them, probably a friend of Ricky's who didn't raise any red flags, someone who was able to convince them to get back into the Chevy Impala without incident and either follow him or take him with them. The couple willingly went to the abandoned garage where Ricky's car was ultimately found, Matthews speculated, maybe expecting to party. The site was a farm off Portage Trail Extension near Northampton Road, right as Cuyahoga Falls descends into Akron's Merriman Valley. She said she's heard things about a local gang that dabbled in stealing motorcycles and dealing drugs, and that perhaps some of its members hung out at this garage. There, Ricky and Mary were ambushed, killed for a reason Matthews couldn't specify, except that it may have been related to either drugs or the theft of a motorcycle. Their killers then transported their bodies nearly 2 miles away, dumping them in overgrowth off a rural stretch of Riverview Road, where their remains wouldn't be discovered for another 6 years. In 2006, yet another Akron officer who had long been haunted by the case asked for permission to review the files. The late Robert Swain was a veteran of the force known for his irreverent sense of humor. But Swain was as diligent and professional as they come, Lieutenant Whidden said, and he had a reason for feeling particularly close to the victims. When Ricky and Mary's skeletons were discovered, it was late in the day, and the forensic team had to make preparations for morning excavation. So a young patrolman Swain was put in charge of babysitting the bones. In 2006, Swain's assignment was to transport prisoners, a job his supervisors still needed him to do. He could reopen the case, they told him, but he'd have to do it on his own time. And so on evenings and weekends for the next 4 years, when Swain was done with his regular shift, he went to the detective bureau, pulled out those binders, and started doing things nobody else had done. At the conclusion, Swain said he could find no evidence that supported motorcycle gang involvement or prove rumors of stolen bikes or drug deals gone bad. What he did find was someone with means, motive, and opportunity, and in 2010, Bob Swain shared with his supervisors, as well as the Beards and Leonards, his theory of what happened on August 24th, 1979. Theory number 2, the angry homeowner. Ricky and Mary's remains were found in an area used as a lover's lane by some local youths. The lane was actually a long driveway that led through woods and overgrowth up a winding incline into the home of a 60-year-old man who was a known alcoholic, had been discharged from the military for psychological problems, and had a history of threats of violence against others. He died in 1994, never having been formally interviewed by police, not even after he reportedly confessed to Ricky and Mary's murders. The man has never before been publicly discussed by investigators or the media, and we're not naming him here out of respect for his surviving family, who declined to be interviewed. But Swain's investigation turned up some very disturbing facts. For starters, the utility crew foreman recalled how in the days leading up to the discovery of the bones, the homeowner was becoming increasingly belligerent toward workers digging a trench next to his property. On the day that the remains were ultimately found, the man was so upset he threatened to get his shotgun and shoot the crew if they didn't stop. In hindsight, the foreman said it seemed clear to him that the angry homeowner knew those bodies were there, that they had lain in the thick brush 30 feet from his driveway, 100 yards from his house for 6 years, and that his growing nervousness over the week was in direct response to how close the crew was getting. Police didn't even need to walk to the man's house to ask him about the discovery that was basically in his front yard, because as soon as he saw police arrive, the homeowner walked down to them, and promptly confessed. There is no record of this. If it indeed happened, that file disappeared over the years, as did others. But Swain believed it to be true for several reasons. For one, the homeowner had a history with the Northampton Township Police Department. Retired officers from that now-defunct force told Swain they were called out repeatedly because kids who had tried to use his concealed drive as a lover's lane saw the working end of his shotgun. He would come out and fire into the air to scare them off. Swain had trouble finding anyone else who remembered this until he had the chance to talk to the angry homeowner's brother. The man confirmed for Swain that his brother did indeed confess, but police didn't believe him, and that he himself thought his brother was just off on a drunken rant. But like every theory with this case, Swain's scenario has serious holes in it. When Ricky's car was found, there were several prints lifted, prints that have never been matched to anyone. Police have long hoped they were left behind by the killer, though there is no way to know. Swain spent months trying to locate the angry homeowner's prints and eventually found them on file with the Veterans Administration, but they didn't match. There's one more theory, a surprise that reared its potential head in 2010. And while it hasn't won a big fan base yet, it's chilling enough to warrant discussion. Theory number 3, the serial killer. You may not have heard of Edward Wayne Edwards, even if he once wrote about how much he wanted to be famous for his crimes. He was born in Akron in 1933. By 1961, he was on the FBI's list of 10 most wanted fugitives, mostly for holding up gas stations. Edwards eventually was caught and served time in prison, and when he got out, he claimed to be reformed, authored a book, and lectured about his metamorphosis. In 1972, his story even landed him on the TV show To Tell the Truth, where a celebrity panel had to guess which of 3 men was the real Ed Edwards. Here's the TV host describing Edwards.
Here is the extraordinary story of Ed Edwards. I think you'll find it profitable. It says, I, Ed Edwards, was once on the FBI's list of the 10 most wanted criminals in America. Now I am a respected citizen in my community. Here's the story of my dramatic turnabout. As a young boy, I felt that the only way I could gain any recognition was to steal. Eventually, I committed armed robberies, impersonated a federal officer, and was sought for questioning about a double murder. I spent time in the federal penitentiaries in Leavenworth and Lewisburg. It was at the latter prison that I started vocational training and very slowly began to realize that I could still be somebody and return to my rightful and legal place in society. There is a tremendous need for communication between parents and their children. I stress this point in my book, which is titled Metamorphosis of a Criminal, signed Ed Edwards.
After the real Edwards was revealed, he explained more about what motivated him to a life of crime.
Ed, there's one important point. You and I were chatting backstage, and I asked you what was the reaction in your neighborhood when you came out of the reformatory the first time. Were you put down by your fellow citizens, or did they look up to you?
No. When I was released from the reformatory, they looked up to me, and this motivated me to go on to bigger things, because this is why I was out there committing the crime, was for the recognition.
Mm-hmm. And this happens because a lot of people think it's a big shot thing to do, huh?
Yes, this is the more trouble you get into, the bigger you are in their eyes.
Here's the thing. It's possible, some say quite likely, that Edwards had already begun a career as a serial killer, specializing in the murder of teenage couples making out in cars. He was married and had 5 kids, but the happy family life he tried to portray hid a darker side. This all came out in 2009. That's when Edwards' daughter called authorities. She thought her father was responsible for the 1980 murder of a pair of teenage sweethearts in Wisconsin. When authorities followed up on the tip of Edwards' daughter, They found a 76-year-old man, sick and on oxygen. They obtained a DNA sample. It matched the DNA found on Kelly Drew's clothes. Edwards knew it was all over for him, but he wanted to finish his life in Ohio. In April of 2010, Edwards made a special request of his Wisconsin jailers.
He indicated to the Wisconsin detectives that he wanted to call us because he wanted to confess to an Akron case, which, of course, got us all excited. We were hoping that it was this case, the Beard and Leonard case. And on April 20th, 2010, Bob and I did a phone interview with him. He was in custody up in Wisconsin, and we were, ready, prepared to take a recorded confession over the phone. Well, it's not the Beard Leonard case he confessed to. It was a case in Norton, an unsolved homicide from 1977. It did involve two people.
Whidden is talking about the murders of 21-year-old William Lavico and 18-year-old Judith Straub. You see, the Akron area had two famous sweetheart murders from the 1970s. This was the other one. In 1977, Lavico and Straub were found at Silver Creek Metro Park in Norton, having been shot point blank with a 20-gauge shotgun. Edwards, who was living in nearby Doylestown at the time, said he'd done that. His execution was scheduled for August of 2011. He didn't make it. He died of natural causes that April. The daughter who turned him in, April Bellazio, is not convinced her father told all. She's convinced her father left bodies behind every time they changed addresses. In August of 1979, when Ricky and Mary were killed, Edwards and his family were living in Florida, but there's no doubt the man knew how to travel. During his redemption phase, he admitted to crimes in 19 different states. And he was very familiar with Akron's North Hill neighborhood. He once lived there, on Avon Street, right across the street from Mary Leonard's cousin. Mary's cousin even babysat for him once, but only once. Mary's sister, Nancy Flock, tells the story.
And she had an eerie feeling about him.
Bad leaves.
Because when she was dating her husband, present husband, he was sitting on his front porch when she'd come home from the date, smoking a cigarette. And she felt that after Willie had left, her bedroom was in the back of the house on the corner, and she heard noises, and she felt he was stalking her. That's the only episode she had with him, but she just didn't have good vibes, and that's why she quit. She would not babysit for him anymore because she just had this creepy feeling about him.
Still, the Beards and the Leonards don't like this theory. They trust Officer Swain's intuition. Lieutenant Whidden does too.
Bob Swain actually struck up a relationship with him. They hit it off. It was kind of interesting. Ed Edwards is an older gentleman. Bob was kind of older, and I think they had a connection. And during that conversation that we had with him in April, it was clear that they really, I think Ed trusted Bob. Ultimately, there's another, the day after the plea that he took on June 11th of 2010, the next day he called Bob from the jail, and he says, look, at this point, I'm sentenced to 2 life sentences. I would tell you, if I killed those 2, I would tell you. What do I have to lose? And Bob believed him. I did too. It's well beyond time that, I would put yourself in the position of family members to think about what you would be going through if it was your loved one. And if you have any information about, however you think it might be irrelevant, any information at all about this, please call us. Crimes Against Persons Unit, Akron Police Department, 330-375-2463. 24 hours a day, you can get a hold of us and leave information. We have a tip line you can leave information on through that number. Look, it's been a long time, and there's been a lot of investigative work put into this case, and we're just looking to give the family some closure finally as a result of this tragic incident.